All right. We are back with another episode in celebration of our seventh annual Philly Theater Week. Today, we are talking with Nick Hatcher and Charlie Gilbert, a part of MusiColab's new Spotlight series, A Closer Look with New Musicals by Philly creators. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and how they are navigating Philly theater lately, but also how they came to be a part of MusiColab and what that looks like for them as Philly artists. So welcome, Nick. Welcome, Charlie. Please introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Sabria. It's great to be here. Let me just kick off a bit because I'm the executive director of MusiColab and maybe have a little bit more of a story to tell about that organization. But I've been around Philly for 40 years now, making musical theater in one way or another. And my involvement with MusiColab is really just the most recent part of that. For about 30 years, I was on the faculty at the University of the Arts. I founded their musical theater program, and I was in charge of that program for many years. And then for a while, I was also the director of the School of Theater Arts, the Ira Brin School of Theater Arts at UArts. And I know Nick, of course, from his days as a student there, but also now as a young early career professional making his way in the Philadelphia scene. So you've got kind of two generations here on the podcast today, me representing the old guard and Nick the new guard. I'm a composer, a playwright, myself a lyricist. I've written a couple of musicals that have been produced here in Philly, most notably Gemini, the musical at the Prince Music Theater when that was still a thing back in the 2000s. And so it's in addition to those things, as a composer, a writer, and educator, now I'm also in a place where I'm trying to lift up other writers in Philadelphia through MusiColab, which is an organization that is supporting creators of new musical theater in Philadelphia. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Nick Hatcher. Let's see, my journey through Philadelphia. I was actually born in Philly. I moved away when I was young, but then came back for college and went to UArts grad. And since I've even been there, I've been working in the community. Started out mostly as a stage manager, just getting around to the different rehearsal rooms, soaking in as much as I can. But I'm primarily a director, writer, producer. I've been lately the past few years producing a lot of different musicals and plays in the city, and a lot of different readings and workshops. And so it's been really, and right now I'm currently serving as the artistic assistant over at the Art and Theater Company for the past few years. So it's been really, really exciting just uh, jumping into all these different projects. And right now I'm really excited to be a part of MusiColab and this new iteration and this new um, what's the word I'm looking for? Process though. This process, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be here with both of you. Thank you, Nick, for introducing yourself. It's like having a very intergenerational conversation about the overall kind of journey of musical theater within Philly, right? Which is very exciting to witness and to be able to host and have a really in-depth conversation about. One of the things I think is really exciting is how MusiColab does these features and these kind of readings opportunities for new veteran and as well as like mid-career artists to kind of like continuously showcase their development in this kind of musical theater genre, which I think is something that a lot of people forget that musical theater is ever, growing and changing and becoming a new thing because the sounds that we want to hear on stage are very much changing depending on, where culture is. I know maybe in early 2000s, we never, thought that Hamilton would be something that would come to us, right? Or what musical theater was. Then it's also like this, we see some musical theater returning to a very golden age sound these days, or those kind of things. So I'm really curious as to talking more about some of the evolution that you are seeing in the musical theater world right now. I like to say that because I'm from the poetry world. So I'm from the poetry world, devising theater world. But I know that the musical theater in Philly is such a strong community of developing like new works. And so I would love to hear about these new works that we're going to see for the Closer Look series, like Spotlight series, as well as what's some of the musicals you're really excited about that are not out yet, but you're like, these artists are really dope.
Well, let me tell a little bit about MusiColab and its role in that scene right now. MusiColab is a new organization here in Philly. We've been in existence since 2018 as an informal operation that was really started by writers, started by creators who felt that musical theater wasn't getting enough visibility in the city, and that there were writers who were creating exciting new work here that needed support, needed visibility. And so the founders of the organization included Seth Rosen at Interact Theater, and a playwright and lyricist and producer named Barbara Bellman, who got together and thought, wouldn't it be great to be able to have something in Philly that was like equivalent to Playpen? Playpen really made a name for Philly as an incubator of new plays, but there really wasn't anything comparable for musical theater. And they thought that was a great idea. And at that point, I was another writer, kind of in that conversation, and eager to see that happen. Fast forward a few years after the pandemic, and as we were regrouping and looking to start up those activities again, it was time to take it to the next level. And so we incorporated, we got our not-for-profit status so that we could begin fundraising. We found a board. We've started to put together a board, and so we're now in our first year of getting financial support from the community, and that's been going very well, so that we can do a more ambitious year-round programming that includes different kinds of performances. We're doing showcase performances where we present a couple of songs from different writers' work, and we're doing that a couple of times a year. We're doing developmental workshops where we can actually pick a show and spend a period of a week or more rehearsing that show and trying to bring it to a state where we can see the whole show and present that to audiences. And we're doing for the first time what we're calling the Spotlight series, which is somewhere in between, where we're going to present 30-minute excerpts of 3 shows. They were chosen out of a kind of competitive process where we asked about, we opened opened up for pitches from different writers, and we got about a dozen different pitches. And Nick and his team with Red and Black were one of 3 groups whose pitch we liked the best. When the MusiColab screened all of these pitches, we thought that these were 3 shows that reflected 3 very different aspects of what was going on in musical theater in Philly. 3 different, distinctly different subjects, distinctly different styles. There are different generations of writers as well, so we're hearing different voices from kind of different places in their career journeys, and we think that that's a great way to introduce Philadelphia audiences to what's going on in the scene. Taking the longer view, musical theater has really been an exciting part of Philadelphia in one form or another my whole professional life, which, as I say, goes back to the 1980s, when I was trying to find an audience for my work. I did some work early on with the what was called then the American Music Theater Festival, which became the Prince Music Theater. And so for a lot of years, I was close to that organization. And then when I was at University of the Arts, we were actually able to do some things in partnership with the Prince Music Theater that led to the development of musicals like Floyd Collins. Adam Gettle's Floyd Collins actually had its first workshop here in Philadelphia. And for a lot of years, the Prince Music Theater was kind of the center of new musical theater development in Philadelphia. In the 90s, in the 2000s, things were really, really popping here. Sabria, I don't know how much you know about this particular chapter in Philadelphia history, but there was a really vibrant scene. And then that organization, because of fundraising challenges, because of organizational challenges, kind of faded out for a while, 11th Hour Theater Company sort of stepped up as being the big incubator for new musicals in Philadelphia, and then that organization as well went through some changes, and the leadership in that organization moved on to other things. So right now, there's a little bit of a void here, and MusiColab is hoping to fill that void and take up the torch, take up the cause of new musicals here in Philly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm familiar with a bit of the history because I'm a ethnographer by trade as well, a community ethnographer, and so a lot of times when I'm stepping into new positions or roles, but also as I am growing as an artist, I love to look at the journeys of fellow artists. Like I have a lot of musical theater friends, and in very different ages, who are like, but they used to be like this, and then we're like, okay, well that sounds great, but what is how when we track how different organizations and different fields of theater are developing, it becomes a tool for us to use as we are looking to develop new ways in the future and sustainable ways in the future, right? So having all that experience, Charlie, allows that notion of like, I've seen it. I've seen it,
Yeah.
You're like, that's not nothing new. I've seen it, but how can I support what you're doing and sustain it even further, right? How can I take what I've learned as a professor, as an artist myself, to encourage, young artists who are coming up and writing these new musicals like Nick to say, hey, how do I support you in what you're doing? And also give you some tools for the use. I know when I talked to Dr. Kanika Williams Witherspoon at Temple, she's always my go-to, her and Amina Robinson, who were my mentors all the Temple, to be like, what is this? Am I doing this right? Is this what is happening? And they're like, you're fine. Like this is this is what's happening. But also because I think this is why it's important to have intergenerational showcases like this, but also intergenerational conversations to be like, okay, what do I not know that's happening presently, but also what don't I know from the past? Nick, I'm curious as to some of the jewels of wisdom that you received from Charlie in this process, but also your own, where do you see musical theater in this generation of new artists who are writing and producing? Okay, this generation, I'm assuming we're like in the later millennials, Nick, or millennials of musical theater. And so our journey with musical theater is interesting because we're learning from the past. We're also trying to pave new and these radical ways of doing music on stage and embodying musical theater.
Yeah, I my journey through musical theater, so I actually started 2019. I can like date it when my journey transferred into like just doing plays and like device work, and to be like, wait a minute, let me check out this scene over here.
Mhm.
Because I started with directing new musicals. Because some of my friends were just like, hey, I'm writing a show. I'd love your insight on it. And I was like, sure, I've only done plays before, and so I'll approach it that way, but like, let's jump in. It's been beautiful ever since. Like my world has been busted wide open to the scene. Um, and I have to say, like producing new musicals in this day and age, like it's producing theaters in general, but like especially musicals, it's hard. It's a really hard thing to get into a little bit.
Mhm.
And so especially um as Charlie said with this journey of like different companies going through different hardships are just like things of the past at this point. It's been tricky figuring out like, okay, how do we produce musicals in Philadelphia? Where do we go? Who do we go to?
Mhm.
Um, and luckily, MusiColab has opened up in a sense this new territory for new artists coming into the field, coming into Philadelphia and wanting to explore musical theater. Um, because me and my team, Sharon America, David Thomas, have been looking around for different residencies and things like that. And most of them are out of town. They're in New York. They're takes us out of Philly. We were just curious. There's like, okay, how do we build our show in our town, in our city, where this is the support system that we have and that we want? Um, and so it's been an interesting journey, but we've been finding so many different other groups of people also being like, no, I write musicals too. How can we collaborate? How can we uh, uh, get each other work shown? How do we support each other? Things like that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, it's been a really beautiful process so far. Of like we just recently did Theater on the Verge, which is a new company who just produced I don't even know how many musicals over the past like 2 weekends. But it was like I think they jumped in over 10. Um,
I think 16 was the official count. 16 musicals through Theater on the Verge. Yeah.
Whew.
yeah, so different companies like that popping up has been wonderful lately for especially for writers of new work and just new development and just really looking to explore really. Um, and so that's just the type of work we've been searching for. And so these collaborations have been wonderful lately. Let's see. What else was your question? I'm trying to figure out.
No, 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 you're doing amazing. Like I think that's the thing about it is like it is new. Like that's the thing about it. It's a new it's as much as we expect the past and also like the evolution of musical theater, we also are like, okay, there are new issues that we want to write about. There are new ways in which we want to write, new things we want to try. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, especially like on the writing standpoints, like I feel like there's been so many experimental things. I find our show a little bit of like experiment itself on how it was created. Because it started off as a collage musical of different scenes being written by different folks and different songs and just going uh, jamming them together and being like, all right, what do we have now? What is the story we're trying to tell? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of us, it was around folks who were written by the same age. Were telling a lot of similar stories, a lot of the same issues going on in the world. And so we were just like, okay, we have a show. Here we go. What do we? What format do we want? What's the structure that we want with it? And we're still kind of learning that as we go along. But over the years, we've been honing that down more and more. And thankfully, because of this past weekend, that we got to have another reading, we got to learn so much more. Like to go into the MusiColab uh, setting now, we now have so much more insight of what we want to focus on, how we want to structure our show, and we're just really, really excited to figure out what we can do with these 30 minutes and what we can show off.
I should say that one of the things that got me excited about what Nick and Sheridan were doing in Red and Black was that I saw a through line that connected back to shows like Hair and A Chorus Line, which are certainly well-known titles now, but emerged out of a similar kind of process from what Nick is describing. That is a group of people with a common interest who got together. In the case of Hair, right, authors who were kind of looking around at the world they saw in the Vietnam War,
Mm-hmm.
war resistance, and so on, and out of that, in response to that, created a work that they were able to find support for in a theater company. In the case of Hair, it was Joe Papp and the Public Theater who said, "Yeah, come on, let's do this, let's develop this, and let's get this to the stage." And it became a very it became a game changer in terms of the way musicals were seen and how they affected society. And the same is true with the chorus line and that process of kind of group creation and group devising. It's not an entirely new thing, but it's a fairly new thing, and it's a really exciting thing. Certainly, I saw that happening at UArts because of the emphasis in devised theater there, the kind of that was a bit in the culture there, and also the kinds of work that were being brought in for the Polyphone Festival at UArts. People were being exposed to some really exciting new models there. So I have a lot of passion for this kind of devised model of creation, and I think it can lead to really exciting work.
Yeah. And what I love also, Charlie, is the notion of like the way in which when we reference those who have been in the industry for 40 years, we're like, oh, they're only relevant to past productions and what has been the history of it. When in reality, y'all are also taking a very present stake in what the future is for it, but also got some new works yourself that you like. I'm still composing. I'm still writing some things on the side. I'm
Oh,
still doing,
yes.
you know, because what happens, I think, a lot of times is that as young artists, there is this need to like get all this work out right now because they're like, I gotta write my big musical today because because I'm in my early 20s or my late 20s, I gotta get it out. And then realizing that as you go on and as you grow, a lot of the information you gather from life also becomes a part of devising and becomes that notion of you writing new musicals. And still, my hope is like to be, somewhere dang near for all of us in way, way future. In my like 90s being like, I still got one more poem in me. I got like one more I could write, just one more poem. But also that the music never stops. It's something that I really love about musical theater. Is because it becomes the notion of musical theater, this notion of like the song happens right when there are no words left, right, to speak. It is like I have to sing this. I have to get this out, right? I think we're living in a world today that is filled with a lot of the need for musical theater, the need because there are a lot of dialogue that's happening that reaches at that pinnacle. It's like I can no longer talk about what's happening. I have to sing this out. I have to put it to music, to rhythm, to embody, to go with the body as well. And we talk about hair. Listen, I don't know how I'll survive without Aquarius. Because I am Aquarius, like I will survive.
No, I love hair too, but the important part of the hair story for what we're talking about right now is that there was a moment when Joe Papp and the Public Theater said yes to hair. They said, okay, we don't know who you are, you don't have a track record, this is not something, that has ever been sanctified by the establishment, but we're going to say yes to this and move it forward. I have had a couple of moments in my professional life where someone has said yes to a crazy idea of mine, and it's been a game changer for me. As a graduate student, I wrote a musical about presidential assassins. I had an idea for a musical about presidential assassins, and I had one of my classmates who was the artistic director of a little theater company, and he said, yes, write that musical and we'll put it on. And I did, and eventually that musical reached the hands of Stephen Sondheim and John Weidman, and the idea of my musical became the basis for another musical called Assassins that's now been done over the world. So that's the power of yes, Sabria, and that's what MusiColab is about. And I think that that's a thing that can happen in Philadelphia here, that we can say yes to these projects, and we're trying to find more financial support, more foundation support and philanthropic support so that we can build on what's here, this incredible pool of young artists, people who have come out of UArts and Temple and Drexel and Penn and have stayed in Philadelphia here to make it a really dynamic scene, but to lift that pool up and to say yes to more projects.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is very highly at the top of a lot of theater genre questions. It's like, who's willing to produce and say yes to these new works, right?
Right.
Without me being, yeah, go ahead. They're talking more about that.
No, I was saying it's been a wild ride of getting our stuff out there and wondering who's going to say yes, who's going to say no out there. And when we started our very first pitch, we didn't even have sheet music at that time, and we were just like, we have this thing with all in our heads. We promise we have a script, and luckily somebody said yes, and that gave us the foundation to go ahead and the support and time to go ahead and create our stuff even more, create that sheet music, create our demos. But it's all through the power of people believing in us and saying yes, let's try that idea, let's go ahead and do it. And it's brought us further and further along in our journey. And so saying a simple yes to this wild idea, just a few people just with a dream just can create so much.
Yeah. And the notion of, having, I think one of the things that comes a part of like people being willing to produce new works, and people being willing to not follow what they think is tradition in a way, I remember very vividly in my temple training, taking musical theater 101 and being like, why do I have to sing this golden age musical? Can I sing something else? And they're like, Sabria, why don't you sing? I was like, can I sing The Wiz? They were like, yeah, Sabria, but I was like, but that's the kind of musical theater I like. I was like, I like golden age, but I said, I don't want to sing it. I said, I don't want to sing it. I know some of my friends who can throw down a golden age musical. I'd be like, yes, that's you. But for me, I said I need a little riff a little bit here and there. I need to hear it, just a little rhythm and blues and all different things. And when we talk about musical theater, I think we've seen it evolved into these different musical genres also coming into musical theater and being like, hey, Hamilton's like we can rap, or there's this notion of like when I think of the stomp kind of thing where it's like that's not a musical. I'm like, have you seen Stomp? Have you seen? I was like, what are you talking about? And and you be like, and the thing about it is being open to the worlds and the culture being very much merged together in many different ways, but also trusting the voices that are coming up, that the voices are not in vain. They are asking us to continue, in order to be sustained, to continue to change, right? And be open to that.
I would say that's one of the advantages of having a few years in my history here is that I've seen a lot, and one of the things that I learn again and again is the incredible diversity of the musical theater. Some people have a notion, like if I make a snap judgment about the musical theater and say, oh, well, that means it's always going to sound like Oklahoma, or it's always going to sound like Guys and Dolls. And there is certainly a kind of wonderful golden age tradition that is part of the musical theater, but that's just one of a lot of different things that are under the big tent of the musical theater. That was the great thing about having the Prince Music Theater, and before that it was known as the American Music Theater Festival. That was very much their philosophy as well, was that musical theater is so many different things. It is cabaret, it is opera, it is hip hop, it is it's carnival celebrations, it is so many kinds of things. And if you study the history, the 20 more than 2 millennia of history of theater and musical theater, you see the incredible diversity of work that's been done. So I'm very much of the mind that musical theater can be anything that has a song and that has a story and that has some kind of spectacle in it. And it doesn't have to be any one particular kind of music or sound or so on. You've got Disney's Frozen going on right now, but you've also got 16 new musicals being performed in a weekend festival in Jenkintown. So that's like the whole spectrum of possibilities right there.
I love that. I want to talk more about also where we see the future of musical theater going. Are there any kind of hopes and dreams for the future of musical theater from you both, as far as how it's supported? We talked about kind of like being produced, period, but also what it includes, where the subjects and topics that it will touch, even digital ways in which musical theater becomes even more present in our culture and in our society, as far as it being essential as well to the arts community.
Nick, I would love to hear your take on that as a young artist, because you're really looking to the future more than me, I would say.
Where my first thought went, speaking of future and technology, you said that, I was like, I went back and thinking through the quarantine portion of the pandemic. I was like, thinking of the simple TikTok musicals that were going on, and the virtual ones that were going on, and how people produced those, and they were actually really, really great productions and great collaboration going on there. Folks just reaching out to each other across the world, going, "Hey, I have an idea here. Hey, I want to join in on this. Hey, I want to do this. Hey, I want to do this part." and how it actually really came together. And so like how simple some collaborations could be, but something that I wish for the future is more especially like regional theaters to like be able to host developmental workshops or host more readings of shows or um, things like that. If finding the resources for that, I think that would be a really great way to just support your local artists going around and really figuring out what's the new voices going on, what are the new conversations that can be had, and looking less to our let's say like subscriber base of having to go, oh, we have to do this show because of XYZ. And going, no, let's actually like further the conversation of things going on right now. What can we speak to not only our older audiences, but our newer audiences and just audiences overall. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited for that future because I think it's coming. I believe it is. And having conversations like this and having be able to have organizations like MusiColab and having different theater leaders taking a chance on things, I think I'm seeing that uh, turn around. And right now, while we're still in a process of the world building back from the pandemic and figuring out how we can produce things. I think there's a nice little sliver of the conversation being like, what can we change? What can we do better? How can we support each other a little bit more? Um, and I'm excited for that. But yeah, I'm excited more how technology plays a part in this new landscape for musical theater. And the sense of being able to go online and just be like, hey, I need a composer. Who's out there? Who's interested? This is the type of work I do. And then finding folks like that. There's so many different now websites for that. So I built the of finding collaborators, finding different actors, finding different artists. If you want to work on something, there's somebody out there who also wants to work with you. Um, so I
I,
just find that always exciting.
I think it's important to acknowledge that we're having a moment here in Philadelphia right now after the pandemic, and Philly's not the only city that's experiencing this, but the theater is really trying to build itself back after the pandemic. And trying to find ways to pay its bills, to sustain those organizations, and so on, and so one of the things one of the ways that is showing up right now is that folks seem to be a little more conservative in their programming, a little more interested in sticking to the tried and true and what they know that people will come in for, and often that is musicals and familiar titles. But I think that what MusiColab's function can be in this sort of environment is an incubator where we are generating new projects and trying to bring them to the producers, the artistic directors of the companies here in Philly and around the country, and say, here are works that speak to our community, that speak to our time, that allow us to do what theater has always done, which is develop our empathy and our ability to care about one another. Because I think ultimately, my hope is that as we continue to build back, that those stories will again become more and more part of the mainstream programming. In the meantime, we'll keep the flame burning here on in our small kind of hyper local do it yourself way, by spending
Mm-hmm.
$1,000 here and a couple $1,000 there to get these new shows at least in front of an audience and amplify the voices of these new writers in any way that we can.
Yeah, and what I love about what both of you are saying is this move from, for a period, there was this commercialization of musical theater, of of repeatedly doing the same musicals and producing the same musicals over and over because they commercially, you know, promise to bring in good money, and we're we're sustainable for people's budgets for the year, right? And then, but the moving towards having these bigger, theater companies also invest in new works in a major way. I don't know why it's giving the thumbs up on our Zoom, but it's confirming. But having this wave of taking the investment into the future rather than the reliance on past stories all the time to sustain us, is what I'm hearing. Is also notion of like we have to make room. We have to make room for the new sounds, And sometimes it's just like when you're playing I can play The Wiz all day. I can play one of my favorite musicals, If Then. I play nonstop, round and round. But there also are times where I'm like, I should probably try to listen to this new musical, or I should try to make sure that I'm also exposing myself to new stories that are coming in. And it's a balance. And I think what I love is that MusiColab is doing the work for this balance, and to say, hey, we recognize, we celebrate all of these that have come before us and all that but we are also preparing ourselves for those that are yet to come. And we're also calling all of you to stay present with us at the same time, and that's the scales that I think we think theater, it's theater, we know it's risky. We know it's like, we know it's unpredictable. But yet we do also rely on it to be predictable. And so the balance of like, no, we're going to make sure that young artists like Nick are getting their time to kind of like say, this is what I have to say about what's happening. Right. And I would like you to be here. I would like you to be with me. But I'm also committed to building a new community who is willing to kind of support the launch of this. And I love that story. I love that notion. I think Theater Philadelphia wants to support more of that work. That's why it's really exciting to see a lot of different, not just theater companies, but collectives and places that coming together to really feel where the community needs in those spaces. So I thank you all both for your work, right, and your vision, but also it's the showcase of it, right, and being committed to it.
I think I thank you. It's great to be appreciated that way, and to hear you say that. I think part of the struggle for us is to keep the morale of the community of writers up during this time. And so there are things that MusiColab does behind the scenes. We meet on a regular basis. We have what we call the MusiColaboratory, which is a group that meets every month. We meet in person. We meet online every month, and we're talking to each other about, well, what's going on, what are your successes, what are the challenges that you're facing, what are the needs that you see emerging in your world, so that as creators we are in dialogue, and we are trying to build a kind of community there as well to sustain ourselves as we continue to strive. And that's a community that is represents a number of different generations here in the city. There are people who are my age who are still creating new work, still have the passion to do that, and people at all different points in their career who are seeking to create new work. And so that's an important part of what I think MusiColab can be as well, not just showcasing the work and presenting it on the stage, but supporting the community of writers and being in dialogue with the community of theater producers and artistic directors to say, hey, check this out. Look at what we're doing. Let us show you the best of what's going on right now, and show you stories that are uniquely Philadelphia, that are uniquely of this moment, that we think your audiences are going to be interested in too. So it's kind of a three-pronged approach that is built into MusiColab in the programming we're doing.
Yeah. And so I want to say, as we wrap up and we kind of in this wonderful conversation about the future of musical theater, the present of it, and the history of it, I want to encourage our audiences who are listening right now to check out MusiColab's Spotlight series, A Closer Look. happening April 14th at 3 p.m. at the Louis Glover Theater at the Drake. Both that Saturday, April 14th, the last day of theater week at 3 p.m. and that Sunday. Then Monday, April 15th is also a show at 7 p.m. So you can go on theaterphiladelphia.org to figure out how to get Pay What You Can tickets, but also I invite you to check out MusiColab's website yourself. Can you shout that out, Charlie? Y'all website?
Sure, we're at musicalab.org, and that's where you can find out about all, not only our Spotlight Series program in April, but all of the different programs that we're undertaking this year in Philly.
Yeah, so I thank you both for being on here, Nick and Charlie. I hope this conversation continues.
Yes.
Not just with us, but with a larger community, as far as how we want to grow musical theater, towards how it can support and sustain the storytellings for our community. So with that, we are ending this podcast episode. Thank y'all for tuning in. Please stay tuned for our next one. And we thank you so much again for being a part of the Philly theater community.